So no matter which photograph I work on, there's 4 distinctive phases that I work on in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you those 4 different phases, how to edit any photograph inside of Photoshop. Hey Cafe crew, it's Colin Smith here from photoshopCAFE, and today I'm going to show you the 4 distinctive steps that I go through for every single photograph that I edit. And I'm actually going to just make it very, very clear which stage we're working in, and this will help you kind of understand the process. So what are these 4 phases? Well, they're quite simple. The very first one is compositional. The second one is tone. The third one is color. Then it's finishing, and that's where we do all the sharpening and stuff like that. So let's jump into the first phase right now. And to help simplify this process, I'm going to wear a different shirt for each phase so you know exactly which phase I'm in. So the first one we're talking about is composition. Well, what do we mean by composition? Well, that means things like cropping, straightening crooked photos, getting rid of any kind of lens correction, any distortions, barreling, those kind of things. That's the first stage. So let's have a look. So here's a shot that I shot with my drone, and you'll notice I opened this as a smart object. So we're actually working on a raw file. Now, there's a lot of tools inside of Photoshop for cropping and all those kind of different things, but where I want to start is inside of Camera Raw. Now, what you would do is you would choose Filter, and you go to Camera Raw Filter. Now, what I'm going to do is just double click, because this is a smart object, that is a raw file. So either way, you're going to get in here, and we're going to start here. So I know there's a lot of duplication between tools inside of Camera Raw and inside of Photoshop. Now, a lot of the time I like to use the ones in Camera Raw because they're more modern, a lot of them work better, and you'll see what happens. I'm going to bounce between Photoshop and Camera Raw quite a bit here. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is get rid of any lens distortion. So I'm going to go to the lens panel. And by the way, if you're in Photoshop CS6 and not CC, you can still follow along. You just want to open this photo from Bridge because you can't use it as a filter. That was a CC feature. All right, so now we're here. We want to go to the profile, and under profile, we're going to enable profile correction. And notice immediately it gets rid of a lot of the distortion. And that's because it knows what I was shooting on, which was a DJI Phantom 3. So this was an older picture I did. And it will choose the lens profile. So we can also turn on to remove chromatic aberration if we want. Now, 2 things happen when we turn on this profile. It's a lens profile designed by Adobe. So what it's going to do is it's going to get rid of the distortion, and it's also going to minimize vignetting around the edges where it darkens around the edges of the lens. So that's the first thing we want to do. Now, you may look at this and say, hey, you know what? There might still be some distortion in here. And if that's the case, we can go under the correction amount here and we can adjust this. See what we're doing here? We can adjust for that distortion. In this case, I'm just going to kind of leave it there because I like this little bit of distortion that came from the Phantom 3. I don't actually mind it. So the next thing we're going to do is go back here to our basic area. And before we make any of these adjustments, because that's what we're going to do in the next phase, I want to straighten this. So let's grab this ruler tool up here. You'll see that, and we're going to click on a horizon and just drag across that whole horizon, and you'll notice, hey, it is a little bit of a tilt there. Release it, and we can see what it's doing. Once I hit enter, it's going to just kind of straighten this. So there we go. So now we've straightened the photograph. So that's part 1. Let's jump into the second section. So the second phase of the process is working with luminosity, or the black and white information. This is what gives it the definition. This is where we're working with our shadows and we're working with our highlights. So here we are, we're still inside of Camera Raw, and there's 2 different parts to shadows and highlights. The first part is the recovery, which is up the top here, then it's toning. So let's have a look at the recovery. If we push it to the left, now we're going to be recovering our highlights. And notice how it gives us just a little bit more detail. You're going to especially see that in the skies. Let's open up the shadows. Now be careful not to go too far with these shadows sometimes. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go up under the exposure, and I'm going to push the exposure up just a little bit. There we go. And now let's play around with the highlight. I'm going to push it all the way to the left. and maybe the shadows not so much. So see what I'm doing here? I prefer to turn up the exposure and recover highlights than push up the shadows. And the reason for that is if you push up the shadows too much here, see how it just starts to look a little washed out and artificial. But I'm going to give it just a little bit more than normal because, you know, there's quite a silhouette there. So the next thing we can do is we can bring this back a little bit with the whites and blacks. So I'm going to push the whites up. And what it's going to do is just kind of clean up those highlight areas. And if I push the blacks down, it's going to give me a little more definition in the shadows. I'm not going to do too much of that right now. And one of the things you could do too, if you wanted, was just click on black and white here. And this will remove the color so it's not going to be distracting you. The other thing you can do is if you hold down the Alt or Option key as you push the exposure, you can see where things start to clip or blow out. So I'm just looking for this tone. I want it to be nice. Watch out for areas to be clipping. Once again, hold down the Alt or the Option key and you can see where those areas start to clip or blow out. So I'm going to take the whites right up to that point. And the blacks, I'm not even going to get anywhere near clipping with the blacks. Now, there's a couple more sliders here. Texture, clarity, dehaze. I know some people love to use a lot of clarity, but look at what it does. It makes the lines look very, very thick. I'm not a huge fan of that, so you want to be kind of careful of this. I'm going to give it maybe just a touch of texture instead. And this, see how it's giving it a little bit more definition? It's making it more snappy. But the texture is not making the lines thick like it does in clarity. All right, so let's just go back here under color and we can turn that back on and we can see what it's looking like. So if we look at this, this is before and this is where we're at right now. So what I'm going to do is click OK. I want to take this into Photoshop. You might see some transparency around the edges, and that's because when we rotated this a little bit in the cropping, so we could get rid of just going in image and choosing trim. Select transparent pixels, click OK, and notice that gets rid of any of those transparent edges. All right, so we're not quite done with our toning yet. What we're going to do is a little bit of dodging and burning. So we're not done with the toning yet. What we're going to do is a little bit of dodging and burning. And what that does is we're going to selectively put in shadows and highlights. It does two things. One, compositionally, it draws the eye into certain areas of the photograph. And the other thing is it enables us to bring out a little bit more depth and definition. So what I'm going to do is just go under the new layer icon, hold down the Alt or the Option key and click. And this will enable me to create a new layer with options. So one of the options, I want to change the mode here to overlay blending mode. Now you have the option to fill this with neutral gray. And if you're going to be using any of the dodge and burn tools, you'll want to fill this with gray. If you're just going to be using brushes, which we are, you don't need to, but it's not going to do any harm, so I'm just going to add that right there. Notice it's now showing in overlay mode. So let me just type in here DB, that's dodge and burn. Now, generally speaking, I do dodge and burn on two different layers, so I'm just going to drag this in here. I could also hit Control or Command J to copy it, and I'm just going to call this one B. So burn, and then the other one's going to be dodge. Okay, so we've got burn on the top, and then we've got dodge underneath. Burning is darkening it, dodging is dodging. Okay, so we've got the dodge and burn there on separate layers. Dodging will lighten it, whereas burning will darken it. And if you can't remember, just remember when you burn toast, it gets darker. All right, so I'm going to be using my Wacom pen for my dodging and burning. You can still do it with a mouse, just use a lower level of opacity than I am because I'm able to use pressure sensitivity with the tablet. So let's just hit the D key to reset the foreground and background colors to black and white. Hit the B key for brushes, and then it's going to select our brush. Now we want to go up under the brushes, and the brush I want is I want to have a nice soft edged regular brush. So just go up here, choose that brush, the first one. Make sure hardness is turned all the way down. Now, if you were using a Wacom tablet like I am, click on here. This will give us the brush settings. And then what you want to do is make sure transfer is turned on, opacity is set to pen pressure. That means it'll work like a pencil. The harder I press, the darker I will paint. If you're using a mouse, just drop your opacity down to a very low number, like maybe 10%. I'm going to tap 2, so I'm going to be working at 20% maximum. So that means if I go light, it's going to do a little bit. If I do dark, it's going to paint with more, okay? So what I'm going to do is make sure I'm on my burning layer, which is the one on the top. I'm going to make this nice and big, and I'm just going to kind of darken down the sky a little bit. Just a couple of little passes there. And what that's going to do is just bring a little emphasis to that photo. It kind of darkens down that brighter sky. And now I'm going to do the same thing down the bottom in the foreground. I'm just going to darken that a little bit. Okay, so what we're doing is just kind of bringing the attention to the middle part of the photo. In fact, why don't I go down the side just a little bit there and create more of a vignette, but we've kind of painted it. All right, so we've darkened those areas. Let's see if that's made much of a difference. Before and after, you can see how it's added just a little bit of richness to it. Now, you can paint in all your different shadows and things like that, and sometimes I do. But now we're going to go down to our dodging, which is the area we want to brighten this. Hit the X key. Make sure that white is now the foreground color. And now I'm going to lighten up certain areas. So what I want to do is just think, hey, this is the light coming through. I want to emphasize this light coming through and, change it up just a little bit. So under the opacity, I'm going to drop it down to 10%. So tap the 1 key and that'll give you 10% rather than 20% of opacity. All right, now I'm just going to paint the light coming in. See how even that 10% gives it a lot? And we're bringing that light in there and it's like, wow. It's just coming across that water, lighting up that rock. Great. And maybe I'll give it a little bit on the horizon. Sometimes I like to do that too. Now what I'm going to do is drop this down and I'm going to hit the front facing parts. I'm going to tap this 3 key, bring it up to 30% opacity. And now I'm going to hit these areas that are going to be receiving that light a little bit more. See how that light's just going to be hitting there. I want to emphasize that. Same thing with these waves here. The front parts of those waves, I really want them to be picking up the light. Just like the sun is just kind of hitting those a little bit more. Even though it's not hitting it directly, it's just going to give it that little bit of silvery kind of a look. And I'm going to get it in here too. This area, I'm going to lighten that up. And you can kind of see what I'm doing here. That forward face, a little bit there. And I'm just going to give it more. Little touch more on the horizon and little here. So it's just going to kind of be careful when you paint around here that you don't create a halo. So all I want is just that light just kind of coming through. So it just kind of makes it look a little more hazy. So if we look at this before and after with that brighter part. Now sometimes what I'll do is on this layer, I'll hit the X key and now I'll paint with black. Even though I'm on my actual dodging layer, I'm burning on it because that's just giving me a really solid shadow for that area. I want that shadow. See what I'm doing there? And same thing here. If I want to put a shadow behind that wave, I'll just kind of drop that in there. And, sometimes I'll do that around this kind of part there. It just gives it a little more depth. So this is the shadow, which will be behind where the sun's hitting. And let's have a look and see what I've done just with those. If we look at that before and after, you can see, hey, that dodging and burning is doing quite a bit. But sometimes it might feel, maybe like it's too much. And if that's the case, I can pull it down. I can adjust the opacity here. See what I'm doing? And now I'm bringing it down to about 80%. All right, now we're at phase 3, and maybe this shirt is a bit of a giveaway of what we're going to be doing. Yes, now we're going to be focusing on color. So different colors have different meanings. So by adding more color or less color can change the mood of a photograph. You can make it more inviting, comforting. You can put people a little bit on edge, add some mystery, some drama. All of this can be done by changing the hue of the color, which is the color itself, or changing the amount of color, which is the saturation. How much of that color are we going to have? So one of the things I love to do is select all these layers. We've been working on a raw file, but now it's time to just mash everything together. So I've selected all 3 of those layers just by simply clicking, hold shift and click, and you select those layers in between. Now I want to create a layer with everything in it, but I don't want to just flatten this. I could right click and turn this into a smart object, which is what I'll do. All right, so now we have a smart object that we can work on. So why don't I go in here and choose filter, and I'm going to choose camera raw filter. All right, so the reason we put all of this into the Smart Objects and Open here so our dodging and burning can be part of this. All right, so let's look at the color. There's two things that we can do, is the amount of color and the color. So why don't we start with the temperature? Is it gonna look better pushing this into the blues? See the kind of mood it has there? It has a good mood. Or we can push it into the warmer tones and see how that gives it a completely different feel. Now, if you wanted to just neutralize it, you could grab the eyedropper up here, go to an area that would be white, and click on there, and that will neutralize it a little bit more. But I'm going to push it up a little more into the warms to give it kind of a golden feel. Now, we can really take this further by going to the vibrance and increasing vibrance. Now, watch what happens when we do that. Now, some people might want to take it to the left, and some might push it to the right. I'm going to push this a little bit further than normal. Now it feels like there's just too much orange in there now, so I'm going to take that color and just pull it back just a little bit. Now we can go into the individual tones, which I'll often do, is we click up here, HSL. So we want to look at the luminosity and the saturation. Okay, so there's two areas I want to do this. Is the oranges, because I want to emphasize that sunset a little bit more, and also these blues. Let's push up the blues, putting a little bit more saturation into them. And that'll give the clouds and the water a little bit more color. All right, this is not really going to take on its full power until we go up here under luminance. And what I want to do is darken those blues a little bit, and notice what that's going to do. And let's take these yellows and push these up a little bit. Just kind of pull them to the left. See, as I darken down those oranges, see how it makes that sky a little bit more prominent, and let's balance it out with the yellows. Now, one thing I do like to do is go into the hue, and I like to take those oranges and push them a little bit towards the yellows. And it just gives, I don't know, just a nicer, warmer kind of feel, a little bit more golden. All right, so that's what we're doing there with the colors. Let's go back. And if we go like this, there we are before, and there we are after. So you can see we've done quite a bit there with the color just by moving those few sliders. Let's move on to the next phase. All right, we're now in the fourth phase. The fourth and last phase is the finishing phase. This is where we're going to do things like sharpening and just kind of final tweaks to just kind of make the photograph look better. Okay, so the first thing I do in this fourth phase is go back over the things I've already done. I'm going to finesse the color and the tone. So let's have a look here. Maybe I want to pull these highlight back a little bit more. Open up those shadows a little. Let's play around with the whites. I'm going to just really make those edges of the foam just kind of pop there. And I'm going to pull the blacks to the left, give it a little bit more body. And this is where you could get very dramatic or, you know, not quite so dramatic. I'm going to take it to about there. And I'm going to give this just a little touch more of texture, just to kind of give it that little extra. It's looking pretty good. Now, I almost feel like I want to put a vignette on here. So I could do that just by going under effects here and go post crop vignette and just pull that down a little bit. And what that's doing is just kind of darkening those edges and just bringing the emphasis here to this beautiful sunlight that's hitting the water. So I think that's looking pretty good. Now, if I hit the P key, you can see that's before and after there. All right, so let's apply that. Great. Now we can turn off the smart filter and that shows before and after those adjustments. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to really just kind of make this pop. So now I want to give some sharpness and definition. So I'm actually going to go in here, I'm going to duplicate this and I'm just going to drag it in there. Of course I could just hit Control J to do the same thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top layer and I'm going to flatten this top layer. I'm just going to choose rasterize layer. And all that's doing is just flattening it out. We're going to change the blending mode to overlay. And by the way, sometimes I'll do this to add some extra color, just to kind of show you what you could do there. If you really want to add some extra color, you could do it like that. But that's not what we're going to do this time. We're going to do this for sharpening. So we're going to go under here and we're going to choose Filter, Other. Now we're going to choose High Pass. All right, so we're doing high pass sharpening. Let's take this all the way to 0. Let our eye calibrate. See how it looks just a little bit soft now? Let's bring it up just a little bit. There we go, until The areas you want are looking nice and sharp. Now I'm going to click OK. Now, why did I use high pass sharpening? Why didn't I just use a smart filter, which I could have? I like high pass sharpening for a couple of reasons. One, I can adjust the opacity of it afterwards, and I can also paint it in where I want or where I don't want. Even though technically I can do that with a smart filter with an unsharp mask. But I just like the look that I get from high pass. It just tends to just be a little bit better around some of these areas of detail. All right, so if I wanted now, I could go in here, create a layer mask. Then I'm going to turn up the opacity to 100. Make my brush nice and big, and I'm just going to paint over here, up in the sky there, just across that horizon. And what am I doing is I'm just removing the sharpening from this kind of area because I want to have it a little bit more hazy. Notice I didn't remove it from the top. I'm allowing it to be sharp up here in the clouds, but this area here where the sun's coming through, I wanted it to just feel a little bit hazy, so I didn't want it just super crisp and super sharp. So anyway, if you have a look at this photograph, we can see the before photo and we can see the after. Okay, so these are the 4 phases I go through with every photograph. Even though this is an aerial photograph, any photo basically can still be broken down to those 4 steps. Now, I don't necessarily always separate the steps like I have here. When I'm working, sometimes I'll go back. Like I might go back and do the tone. I might go back and tweak the color again. And to be honest, when I'm working a lot, I will go back on those earlier phases and just kind of keep finessing and fine-tuning things. And one tip I'd like to leave you guys with is when you have your photograph like this, just go away, have a cup of coffee, do something else. Let your eyes just kind of recalibrate, because when you get used to looking at this, you don't necessarily see the colors. I'm not sure how saturated these colors are or how warm or how cool they are because I'm so used to looking at them right now. If I go away for a while and then I come back and I can look at this with fresh eyes, then I'm going to see it differently. In fact, why don't we do that right now? All right, guys, I'm back. I just took a little bit of a break, went and had some water, whatnot. And let's have a look at this image with fresh eyes. Okay, I see this quite differently than I did before. I'm looking at it. It's not bad, but it feels to me like it's lacking a little bit of contrast. Now, I feel it needs a little bit more punch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this and I'm going to go into Camera Raw. So let me choose Filter, Camera Raw. All right, so let's give it a little more contrast. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take these blacks and just pull them down a little bit. In fact, why don't I open up the curves? Because where I feel like it's missing is it's not too bad in the shadows and it's not too bad in the highlights. I just feel like these mids here just need a little bit more. So I'm going to change this to a point curve and I'm going to go here and pull down those mids. See how it's giving it just a little bit more body there. I'm going to keep these highlights nice and bright. And let's have a look at the shadows. Let's just bring those shadows back just a little bit. So what I'm doing is just kind of dipping it a little bit there, and it's just giving that little more strength here in this area of the image, and it just makes it feel like it's got more punch, and this just looks a little bit more golden to me. It's a small change. Another thing I want to change is I'm going to go up here under the gradient, and I'm going to just drag this gradient down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color temperature. I'm going to cool it down. So notice what it's doing here is it's just kind of putting a little bit more deep blue into the sky here. And if I pull this down, notice how it'll start to affect the entire image. But if I just keep it up here, I just want to add that just in that top part of the sky. It just kind of breaks it a little bit for me. Just click on the hand tool to apply that. And maybe just slightly warm up the image now, just ever so slightly. See what I'm doing? But now we've still got that nice blue sky. We're giving it a little more orange. Okay, so let's have a look and see before and after. If I hit the P key, that's before and after. Subtle changes, but you can see it's giving it just that little bit more punch that I wanted. All right, so why did I decide to add contrast? Because I know sometimes people look at a photograph, and I know I did when I first started working in Photoshop. I was like, should I make this lighter or should I make it look darker? It kind of looks good both ways. Should I make it warmer or cooler? It looks good both ways. Which way do you go? What's right and what's wrong? Well, here's the thing. You are the artist. It's your taste. It's your piece. If you decide you want to make it more contrasty versus less contrasty, neither of those are wrong decisions. They're just going to create a different mood. So decide what it is. What kind of mood do you want with that photograph? And then kind of do your processing to kind of enhance what it is that you're wanting to do with your photo. There's endless ways you can edit it. So there's not necessarily right and wrong. It's just your particular taste and your particular style. Now, as you start to do more and more work, you're going to start to develop your own style. You might not really be comfortable with a style yet. But the more you do it, the more you will develop that signature style until eventually people will be able to look at the work and go, ah, I know who did that. So I know this was a little bit different than a lot of the tutorials I do. I maybe put a little bit more philosophy in this one than normal, so it's not just steps. But I'm curious if you guys enjoyed this or learned anything new. If you did, let me know in the comments underneath. What did you learn in this tutorial? And also, what would you like to see for future tutorials? Also, let me know. And if you guys like Photoshop and Lightroom, and you're not a subscriber on photoshopCAFE yet, hit that subscribe button right now, and you're going to get a new tutorial from me every single week, usually on a Tuesday. Ring that notification bell so you know when I upload. So anyway, guys, you know what I'm going to say next. If you like this, smash the like button into dust. Dust that like button. And until next time, I'll see you at the cafe.